All right, so as you guys know, we're going to talk about Drupal plugins and the Drupal plugin system. So there are a bunch of different ways that they can be discovered. So there's annotation, YAML, hook, and static ways, but we're just going to go over the annotation and YAML. All right, so a little bit about my development history. I started working with Drupal about 4 years ago, and I've been, working with Drupal ever since. These are some of the projects that I've worked on that I'm really proud of. I really like to work on government projects, so I'm just gonna skip over that so that we have enough time for the other stuff. Oh, okay. All right, that's fine. So this is our agenda today. We're going to go over what plugins are, why use them, how they're discovered, and then of course those two plugin discovery types that I mentioned, annotation and YAML. And then we're going to go over plugin derivatives, plugin decorators, using plugins that have already been defined in Drupal, and then some real world examples that already exist in Drupal. So what are they? So plugins are small pieces of functionality that are swappable and or reusable, and they're object-oriented components. So they're based off of namespace discovery and interface discovery, and you use classes to define them rather than hooks in Drupal 7, or like in Drupal 7, I mean. All right, so why use them? So clean object-oriented design, which I sort of went over just then. So it's separated out really nice and clean. And then they're configurable. So like if you want to add some pluggable pieces of configuration, for example, you could do that, such as like blocks and stuff. And then they're reusable. So you can reuse them in multiple places if you need to. And they're loaded cleanly through a plugin manager service, which is nice, and they're fast. So they use Drupal's caching system, which is nice. That means they don't have to be like they don't have like there's a place that they're stored so that you can just pull them out, and it's not going to take a long time to load. So these are the three plugin discovery types. I didn't put hooks on here mainly because we're not going to go over those. So there's annotation, YAML, and static. And annotation those are the ones that are defined in a class. And then YAML is defined in YAML files. So like your routing file and your libraries files, those are actually plugins. And then static is just a static way that you can define them. But again, we're not going to go over those. All right, so creating an annotation-based plugin. So what you need for an annotation-based plugin is you have to have a annotation class. And this is defined at source, annotation, and then whatever your plugin type is. So that's the namespace that you want for your annotation class. And then you also want to make sure there's a plugin manager, which is also a class. It's defined as a service in your module.services.yaml. And then it has the naming convention of plugin.manager plugin type, and this will extend something called the default plugin manager, which is just the default plugin manager class that gives you like pretty much all of the basic functionality that you need. And then what you also want is a plugin interface class, or an interface, excuse me, because that's not a class. And this is what all of your plugins will implement. So that's how it gets called. It's like one of the ways that it gets called. And again, you'll see this in a second over in the code editor. And then of course you want your plugin class. So this is defined under source, plugin type, and then your plugin definition class. And I'll show you this in a second so that you see what that means exactly. All right, so the first thing that you need is a plugin annotation. So the class should be created under source/annotation. It should also have a comment that has this @annotation in it. That's how Drupal discovers it, or part of it. And then variables should be created with public access, which I think is important if you're not used to creating this, because most of the variables are either private or protected. So with that being said, I'm going to show you what that looks like on the screen so you can see it better. So what that means is you need this this doc block comment right here, and you just need to make sure it has this right here. It also needs to extend this class called plugin, which gives you all of the like the plugin annotation stuff that you need. And then as you can see, these are all of the variables I've defined for this particular plugin type. Again, these could be like whatever you need for your plugin type. So that's pretty much the gist of how you create your annotation for your plugin, for your annotation based plugin, that is. All right, so the second thing that you need to make sure you have when you're creating an annotation plugin is the plugin manager. So this plugin manager class should extend the default plugin manager, and I'll show you this over here because I know this is hard to see. And then you also want to make sure that you have it defined in your services.yaml file in your module. And then when you call the parent constructor, you'll need the plugin subdirectory, the parent namespaces, the module handler, and the plugin interface namespace, as well as the plugin annotation namespace. And so I'm going to show you what that means exactly, all that jargon. So I'm going to create or make this bigger. So what that means is that all of this stuff right here needs to be passed. So like, as you can see, plugin/theme component, that's the subdirectory that the plugin sets. And then these namespaces and module handler, you just pass that to the parent constructor because it needs it. And then you'll also need to define a theme component or theme component interface, a plugin interface. Mine's just theme component interface in this instance. And that's what all of your plugins will implement. And then over here, you pass in the annotation, the plugin annotation. And then after you pass in all that, that pretty much just makes this work. Really, when you're just defining an annotation plugin, this is all you need right here. And then these two methods right here, you need those as well, just so that you can alter it and have the caching set up for it. But that's all you need is this line, and this line after extending the base default plugin manager. All right, and so the plugin class definition, this is like where you actually have an instance of your plugin. So you need this fancy annotation up here, except this time it's @theme component, because that's what I defined earlier in the plugin annotation class. So I'm going to show the interface first, just because I think that's important too, since you have to have this. This is what the plugins would implement, and I just set up some arbitrary methods just for this example, but you could use whatever methods that you need for your plugin type. And so this is the plugin definition that you saw on the slide, and it just creates a button theme component and extends a base class which implements that interface that you just saw. Okay, so before I get to the YAML stuff, are there any questions for what I just went over? No? Okay. All right, so we'll go over the YAML ones now. So for the YAML based plugins, you need a YAML file, and you need the plugin manager. And that's all you need for this. You do have to set up the plugin manager different, but I'll show you that. So for your YAML file, what you'll do is you'll create a file that is your module name, dot plugin type, so like libraries, routing, that it uses this thing too, dot YAML. And then of course you'll need the plugin manager class. The big difference with using the plugin manager class here is that you have to override the get discovery method, whereas with an annotation plugin you do not, because it's already set up for annotation by default. It makes it easy to use that, whereas with this, like, you don't even call the parent constructor because the default plugin manager is based off of annotation discovery, but it does still work for YAML plugins and other discovery types. So this is an example of what a YAML plugin file would look like, and I'm going to show you over here just in case that's hard to see. All right. So it's pretty much just defined the same way, except it's using YAML syntax instead of the annotation syntax that you saw earlier. All right, so here's a YAML plugin manager, and I'm going to show you this over there because, again, I know this is hard to see. So it should still extend the default plugin manager. The parent constructor should not be called, and the get discovery method should be overridden so that you can use YAML discovery instead of annotation discovery. So here is this. Okay, so as you can see from this right here, I did not call the parent constructor. The only reason I did this is because I wanted this to be discovered in my theme. YAML plugins are special in that they're the only plugin discovery type that you can use in your theme. So sort of like layout builder and like libraries and all of that, those can be defined in your theme, whereas annotation can only be defined in your module. All right, so here's where I overrode the get discovery method, and instead of using annotation discovery, I used YAML discovery. And this right here is that sort of that namespace, or not namespace, like plugin type, like plugin underscore type. That's where this would go. So like module name dot theme component dot YAML, and then this passes in the directories. So that's how I got it to look at the theme stuff too over here. And then, in case you didn't know, this is a type of decorator right here that wraps around any other discovery method, really, and just allows you to have plugin derivatives, which we will go over later. So that's pretty cool. I think there's another method too that I want. Yeah, okay. So this right here, this method should probably be overridden as well. I didn't mention it because I actually discovered it later. But it's probably best to override this too if you're going to put theme directories in your plugin type. All right, so go to the next slide. Excuse me. All right, so here's some additional plugin manager info. The class level variable defaults can be used to create default values for the plugin definition keys. And while I'm at it, I'll just show you what that means. This right here, this is a protected local variable that the default plugin manager uses, so that whenever you call to get definitions and stuff, if you want these keys to have default values and the plugin did not define them, it will get these as the default. So they won't turn up like null, or just the key won't exist or anything like that. So if they're like required, this is probably a really good way to do this, unless you actually need a value there. Okay, if using any discovery class that is not annotation based or needs more than the annotation discovery, then the get discovery method has to be overridden. So that's sort of like where with the YAML discovery, you need to make sure that you're overriding that method. And then if you're going to wrap anything around the annotation discovery, you still have to override that method. That's all that's saying. And then if using YAML discovery and you want plugins to be available in your theme, then you need to add the theme handler service to your plugin manager service and override okay, so this actually shows you that you need to override that provider exists method as well. Okay, and so this is it defined. And I'm going to go over here so you can see it actually defined. For this demo, I have both of these because one's YAML and one's annotation based just for demoing. And then, so this is how you define it, just like a regular service. And you can actually, if you're not going to override any of the parent constructor stuff, you could just put parent colon and then the core default plugin manager up there, and it does the rest, which I think is like really cool. But I had to override these, so that didn't work for me. All right, so creating a plugin derivative. So for a plugin derivative, you need a plugin derivative class. And then I'm going to show you how to use them on annotation-based plugins and on YAML-based plugins, which they're sort of similar, but I figured show you both just in case. All right, so this is the example derivative that, hold on, I'm going to pan back over here because I think, yeah, okay. So this is the plugin derivative that I created, and with your derivative, you pretty much want to make sure that you extend something called deriver base. It takes care of all the plugin derivative type stuff that you need, and then you want it to be at this namespace, so plugin / derivative namespace. And then, so this method right here is the only one that you need to get derivatives. And I just use this arbitrary thing. You could get this data from anywhere, but essentially what it does is it takes a list that you want to derive off of the plugin that you created. So like, it'll take that base plugin definition, and then in this example and other examples, you'll add stuff to it. So like whatever you want to add to it. For this example, it's just like different colors and stuff. But yeah, you could get this data from anywhere, but that's how you create a plugin derivative. And that's just to derive additional data off of one plugin definition. All right, so using a plugin derivative on an annotation plugin, essentially all you want to do is make sure that you have this deriver key. So I'm going to show you what that means over here, just so I know that you guys have seen it. All right, so you just add this additional key, and then you add the namespace of your derivative, and it will derive all of those, which means that whenever you call to get the definitions of a plugin, it will show up that, like in this instance, 5 or so, however many colors I had on there. That's how many plugin definitions it will pop up, instead of like if you just didn't have this, it would just pop up with a button. Whereas with the deriver key, it's going to pop up with this plugin ID right here. And that's because I defined it as a derivative right here as a key. So, so that's how you create a deriver, or a derivative, I mean. And then I'm going to go, I think the next slide is for, yeah, YAML. All right, so essentially you just do the same thing. I'm not sure if you guys can see that over here, but like if I wanted it over here, I would just take this, and it's pretty much defined the same way. So like that. And then it'll make all of those do the same thing that the other one does. All right, so getting and using the plugin. So the plugin manager class for your plugin type has a method to get an array of defined definitions with the get definitions class. So whenever you call get definitions, when you have a driver, it'll just pull up. It'll pull up all of those ones that you saw, and then if not, it'll just pull up these each individual ones if they don't have a driver. I have an instance of this over here. Okay. All right, so essentially what I did was just create a block for this because it was the easiest way that I could think of just to use this right now. And so what you want to do to get your plugin definitions, which will show up as an array of an array. So like as you saw those plugin definitions, like it'll pop up with all this stuff for each plugin definition. So it won't show up with a class or anything for the annotation yet. So yeah, I just got all those definitions and add them to a form. And then this is how you actually get a class. So like an annotation class, you create the instance that you need with the plugin ID that you've already defined, and it will get that class that you defined. And so a really big benefit of this is that you can call methods on it. So in this instance, I've called get content, and then if it's empty, then set content, and then I even have a method for build content as well. And so that's like one of the really big powers of using an annotation-based plugin, because you can think of a number of methods that you could use on stuff that you need. And again, that does need to be defined under the proper namespace for it to be seen. So source plugin type. In this instance, it's a theme component. All right, so you can also have something called a plugin discovery decorator. And so, excuse me, what that does is wraps around an additional discovery method to either extend functionality or even add another discovery method. And I do have an example of this over here. All right, so normally if you're just going to use the annotated class discovery and this right here, that's taken care of for you in the default plugin manager. But in this instance, I was like, okay, well, you can add YAML discovery, which means that you can have annotated class plugins and YAML plugins, and you can use them together for the same plugin type, or they're technically not the same plugin type at that point, but they're using the same manager and all of that, and they're cached the same and all of that. A really good example of this, if you ever want to go and look and see what actually does this, is Layout Builder. I think it might be the only one that uses an annotated class discovery as well as a YAML discovery method. Of course, this is a decorator, as you can see, and it just essentially wraps around this and uses the main YAML discovery class. So it extends that. All right, so real world applications. So I'm gonna close all this and then show you where this is being used at already in Drupal core, and not just some random plugin types. Just give me a second to get this pulled up. Should not take me long. All right, so the block plugin manager is defined in core.services.yaml, and it just uses the parent with one additional argument. So it actually shows you that how to use the parent part that I was telling you about earlier. So that's a real world example of the plugin manager class for blocks. And then this is also the same for field types, field widgets, and field formatters. I'm not going to get too much into this stuff because it's a lot more complex than what I was showing you. Let's see here. Okay. So this is also a plugin. It's a routing plugin, and this is how for those of you that know, this is how paths are defined in Drupal in your routing.yaml file, and it uses this controller right here. So yeah, I'm going to go to that and show you how all this works with blocks, because I think blocks are one of the most prominent plugins in Drupal. All right, so what this does is it gets the entity list builder and stuff, and then it renders it. So this is actually using a block configuration entity type. And something that's really cool, I think, is also, this is also a plugin. That's how configuration entity types as well as content entity types are defined. They use plugins to be discovered. Annotation plugins, discovery to be exact. And then what this does, and this helps to provide a plugin that is configurable, is it stores the plugin settings on the configuration entity. So it uses a plugin on top of a plugin, which, yeah, I think that's really awesome. Okay, so just wanted to show you that, because that's how blocks make that's how blocks use plugins. They store them as configuration on top. And then what this does is it will add. Okay, so it will add this to the entity form. This is how blocks get created and added to the entity form. So it calls this method on the main entity form up here, and it gets stored as settings, which, yeah, it's really nice. So that's an instance, or that's how blocks are used. That's a real world example of how blocks are used. It creates an additional form on top of the entity form and allows you to add all those all those configurable fields that you see by using that settings key. All right, so that was blocks and routes. The next one that I'm going to go over is field types. Sorry, this is taking so long. I forgot to pull these up. Okay, so this is a field type for those of you who haven't seen them before. And it uses, it actually depends on other plugins. So the field widget and the field formatter, it uses these keys to use them all three together, so that it's dependent on that. And
there are a couple questions in the chat window, Gloria.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
I didn't think to check there.
Benji, I'll tell him to you. Benji asked, somewhere in core/library Drupal core, I guess there's a plugin manager for routing YAML file plugins.
Yes, unless that's defined in Symfony. I'm not 100% sure where the routing plugin manager is. I do know that they are defined that way, but I'm not sure if Drupal defines them or Symfony does, because I know Symfony does some of the plugin stuff.
Okay, and then Bernardo asked additional use cases for creating a custom plugin type.
Okay, so I have a slide about this. Okay, making the abstract nature of creating plugins more concrete. And so this is some examples that you might want to use it for. So the number 2 things that I could think of, the top 2 things I should say, are external APIs and modals. So like if you need a bunch of different front end modals and you need them all to be sort of defined similar, as well as like external APIs, like if you have more than one external API endpoint, but they sort of use like similar functionality, that would be an example. And then anything that you need like configuration for that blocks can't handle, or that just a regular settings form can't handle. So like if you wanted to add pluggable, configurable stuff to a settings form, for example, you could just have a plugin defined for that. It doesn't necessarily have to be really specific towards anything, I guess, just as long as there's a use case for it. And I know that's probably not like the best explanation of it, because these are sort of abstract whenever you're trying to define the like the shell as well as the functionality for it. I hope this helps, like with the external APIs and modals, like where you could go uh, with that. Does that answer questions? I wish I could see the chat window. I don't know how to pull it up.
But he said that it answered his question.
Oh, okay, cool. All right, so yeah, these are real world examples that I could think of, as well as like any type of component that you need that you're going to have to reuse or swap out potentially in the future. It sort of safeguards that, because um, whenever you're wanting to reuse something, it's best to have like an interface for it, and that's what this provides a reusable, pluggable interface for a variety of needs. And again, these are just the 2 examples that I could think of, that's not in core or something. So yeah, I'm just going to finish going over the field type and field widget and field formatter. All right, and so this is a field formatter, and it uses more than one field type. So you can have multiple field types for a field formatter, and it uses all of these plugin IDs. So it uses more than one plugin if you need it to in this instance. And then I'm just going to go over this real quick. Okay, and then same thing here, same thing with the widget. More than one field type can be used for this. Okay, so here's my number 1 helpful tip for creating these. If you have an idea that you think you could use plugins for, use Drupal console. It creates all the boilerplate code that you saw, and it makes life so much easier. Yeah, I highly recommend, if you're wanting to learn how to use Drupal plugins, to use Drupal console and then go from there, even if you don't understand how everything works yet, because it does create so much stuff for you. And it also creates a ton of other stuff too. So again, definitely use it. These are the commands that you would need to start generating plugins. So of course you have to require it with Composer, however. And then you do one of these two commands, just depending on what you want to use. All right, and that is the end of my session, even though it's like super early. I'm gonna have to add a little bit more to this session. Oh, actually, hold on. All right, so this is a demo. I do want to show you the demo of what I've created here, and sort of the power of plugin derivatives and adding them on top of other configuration. All right, so this is that form that you saw earlier where I got the definitions, and this is the list of definitions. And this is how a lot of plugins are used. They just add on top of additional Drupal configuration. And see, yeah, it changed it because I've set it up to where it'll use the class. So I'll show you that now, because I don't think I've shown you that. Oh, right, because it's in the base class. So this is the base class. And essentially all this does is adds the element to the tag. This is a render element. The HTML tag is a type of render element. And then it gets this, the plugin definition element key, and then it'll get this content from this method up here, and it checks to see if it's empty, and if not, whatever, it'll still use it. And then this gets all those attributes, and then that gets added. The reason why it's adding those classes is because I've made it do that here. See, it's adding that to the attributes class. So yeah, I thought I'd show you that, so that's a little less abstract. Are there any questions that I can't see for some reason? Okay, I see how to access the chat now. Figures. Sorry. Devil's advocate. Although plugins use OO programming, the plugin ID has to be unique for the plugin type. So we are really going back to the old hook paradigm where the name is magic and has to be unique. Yes. Okay. So, and I feel like this is one of the powers of derivatives, Benji. So, like, even though it's unique to that that one instance, it's still going to be button and then something. You can derive it off of other stuff. Whereas with hooks, you sort of had to call everything. So again, these are cached too. So they're faster. And of course they use object-oriented stuff, which I'm actually sort of biased towards, because I started with Drupal 8, and I learned how to code with object-oriented programming. So what I would say to that is that derivatives can help solve that unique issue. That way you don't have to keep defining the same thing over and over again. So it essentially adds all of those derivative plugins up under that one plugin. So that would be a way to prevent it from being too unique, where you're just defining a bunch of stuff over and over again, sort of like you do with hooks. Is Benji still here or no? I was just,
Yeah,
he
I'm
said
here.
he was playing. Oh, okay. I just saw your devil's advocate thing, and I was like, well, yes and no.
No, but if my module defines a foo block plugin, and your module also defines a foo block plugin, then anyone who tries to install both of our modules is going to get a white screen of death, right? Or at
Ooh,
least
that's a good
something won't work.
question. That's a good question, because I've actually never tried that before in two different modules. I do think that they'll be unique. I'm not sure if you can actually say, hey, like if you're talking about foo, like get foo, like and it just be foo. I do know that they have a provider key. So yeah, that's actually making me wonder, because I honestly don't know. Like if you define two of the same types, I don't think you'll get a white screen of death though. I think at worst it will just override one or the other. That's my thought on it.
Wouldn't in that case maybe just namespacing be a best practice?
Right. Yeah. So I think what he's saying though is that, like if you're just getting the definitions, right? Or you're creating an instance and you're just using the plugin ID. If there's two plugins that have the same ID and they're of the same plugin type, like blocks, like two blocks with the plugin ID foo, for example, if you create an instance of that or you try and get that, is it going to error out? And I don't think it would error out, but I also don't know if it will keep all of that. So yeah, I don't know about that. I'm actually going to test that sometime just because you asked that.
So I don't know how it will break, but you won't be able to get both your block and my block. So something
Right.
breaks.
Unless
So
there's
that
some fail-safe, yeah.
So I don't know who chimed in, but if you namespace it, like you prefix it with your module name, then it feels like we're getting back to the old pattern where every function we make had to be prefixed with the module name just to avoid collisions of function names.
Right. I'm honestly not sure, of how things used to work in Drupal 7 because again, I started in Drupal 8. I do know that these are faster though. And because they're object oriented, they're separated out. Whereas like with hooks, like we normally just stick everything in that one file, right?
Yeah,
But
hooks all have to be in the module file in Drupal 7.
right, right. Similar to how actually a lot of the hook stuff that you see in Drupal 8 still uses the hook discovery that Drupal 7 used. So you can still define plugins with hooks. I just didn't go over them because they're not I guess, the biggest player in Drupal 8. So I wanted to definitely go over like what blocks use, for example, and layout builder and all of that good stuff.
So we are really close to time. My internet went out, so I wasn't able to give you the 5-minute mark.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah, I figured we were about done.
Okay, are there any other questions?
Maybe, yeah, all right, sounds good, Mom. I hope you have a good day too.
Great, okay. Thank you, Gloria. That was fantastic. And good job on your first Drupal presentation.
Thank you.
Quite a feat. So thank you, everybody. I'm going to stop the recording now.